I'd like to just introduce myself. I'm Dawn Sweeney, a former board member of both Save the Children and SCAN, and a current part of 100 Strong and the Aboard Alumni Network. So I think I hit all four groups that we've invited here this evening. We wanted to continue a conversation that several of us had just a couple of months ago, really, but things were very different back then. A lot has evolved and changed since that time. And so we're delighted to have such a wonderful group of individuals to speak with us about the topics that we're here to discuss in terms of the election and election-focused issues as it relates to children. We had a call in July, so it was just a couple of months ago. Obviously, a whole lot has happened since then. We have a new presidential candidate. We have a very interesting political environment at the moment, which we'll hear more about this evening, and very happy to welcome all of you, members of those of you who are members of the SCUS board. Thank you for all that you do for children. That is a magnificent contribution that you're making for the world, and we're grateful to you for that. 100 Strong members, that's our philanthropic leadership group of women that was founded by a handful of our SCUS board members a few years ago. We have with us this evening the two co-chairs, Anya Salama and Corinne Bassler, both with us this evening, and thanks to both of you for all that you do in leading 100 Strong. The Board Alumni Network, Sunil Sani is the chair of that, doing an amazing job of engaging former board members in continuing in the work of Save the Children. Sunil, thank you for all that you do, and welcome to all the board alumni who are on the call. And then finally, and importantly for every conversation, and particularly this one, the SCAN Board of Trustees, under the leadership of Christy Gleason. We have the board chair, Cynthia Nava, who is a board member of SCAN with us this evening. And Cynthia and all of the SCAN board, we're grateful to you for all that you do. This will be an important conversation this evening, especially with the election just 3 weeks away. We're very, very honored and delighted to have with us this evening all of our speakers. Want to begin by introducing Mark Shriver. Mark, as many of you know, and likely all of you know, has been involved with Save the Children now for over 20 years. For those of us that have been with him in that 20-year journey, some of us have aged. Mark somehow has not, but he looks almost identical to the way he looked when I first met him literally 20 years ago. So there's something to be said for that. Maybe that humanitarian spirit just keeps you young. If that's the case, that's good news for all of us. Mark led, as many of you know, SAVE's US program for many years. He was integral in all capital letters in the creation of SCAN initially, some 10 years ago. And that was, as you know, founded as the political advocacy arm of Save the Children, and turns out to be a very, very important part of the arsenal of tools that we have to advance the interests of children. Mark himself was an elected official, is a former state legislator in the state of Maryland. Obviously, he has a unique perspective. He has very, very deep knowledge at the intersection between politics and children's issues and issues in general. I wanted to just acknowledge, Mark, for you and your family, how deeply sorry we are for the passing of your aunt late last week. Ethel Kennedy was an absolute American and global, really, treasure. Many of us know that she received a Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Obama in 2014 for the dedication that she showed over her lifetime of advancing the causes of social justice, human rights, environmental protection, and poverty eradication and reduction at a minimum, by creating, as President Obama said, countless ripples of hope to affect change around the world. And we've witnessed that in her life. We witnessed that in your life, Mark, and from all of us to your family. We're just so very, very sorry for your loss. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that and just say to you, thank you for making yourself available this evening, just on the heels of that family loss that you are experiencing. We're also very sorry. So with that, and the election approaching so quickly, we're very grateful to you for so many reasons for your participation this evening. I'll turn it over to you for some comments, please.
Thanks a million, Dawn. That's Wow, really beautiful. It's a memorial service yesterday down at St. Matthew's Cathedral, and you could have spoken.
Oh,
That
I watched it. It
yeah,
was a live
you're
stream for most of
yeah,
us. It was
you're
amazing.
everybody spoke beautifully, but none of them did better than you. So thank you
Oh,
for those
thank you.
really nice words there. Um, Ethel, was my mom's best friend and was around. I mean, I don't remember any time without her, so it's a big loss. And she was a boatload of fun and energy and commitment to the common good. And as I know, everybody on this Zoom is. And you've already introduced so many of the folks, Dawn, but I just want to say thank you to everyone for their interest in not only the work that Save the Children does, but its relationship to SCAN as the political advocacy arm under Christy's leadership. I think over the last 10 years has made a huge difference. Dawn, as we've talked about, when the entity was created with you and Sunil some 10 years ago. I mean, it is the intersection of policy and politics and making sure that kids' issues are not forgotten, that they are front and center, right? And for so many years, kids' issues have not been a priority. I mean, politicians, as we said years ago, have this bobblehead syndrome where everybody tells you you're doing God's work and they all say it's really, really important. And then when push comes to shove, kids get the short end of the stick. They don't get the resources either domestically or internationally. And that's why both the work of Save the Children on showing how to do the work and then SCAN on advocating for systemic changes are such an important 1-2 punch. So I think the work that 100 Strong, that the SCAN board, that Save the Children board, the alumni folks are all involved in are really crucial. Sunil and I were talking the other day about, I went to the conventions with Christy and the SCAN team, Republican and Democratic conventions. It's really important to continue to raise the flag on children's issues, to say how important it is to invest in our youngest people who don't vote and in many cases don't have the resources, obviously, to make contributions to political wannabes or political leaders right now. So the work that this group is doing and continues to invest in is really, really important. And this presidential election is going to come down to a handful of votes in a handful of states. It's going to be that tight. It's going to be, a couple 100,000 votes, if that, across 7 states. I mean, I'm really interested to hear what our, fellow panelists are going to say here. But I think it's really going to be tight. It's going to be tight not only on the presidential level, but I remember a couple of years ago, Dawn, I know you live over in Virginia, but if memory serves me right, the state legislature in the House was tied. And the last seat, it was tied. And they had to flip a coin. And I think a Democrat won, which meant that the House was evenly split. And then they had to flip a coin about whether a Republican was going to lead the state legislature or a Democrat. It was literally the flip of a coin because it was tied. So anybody who tells you that, your vote doesn't matter, or your kids vote, or your nieces, your nephews, your next door neighbor, they're wrong. We have to get, as Teddy Roosevelt said, get off the sidelines and get into the arena, get engaged, stay engaged, advocate, and have your voices heard. Because if you don't, we really have no one to blame but ourselves, particularly on kids' issues. And then I'll shush up and turn it over to you, Christy. It's not the number one issue across the board. There are other issues that have taken more importance in people's minds. In my mind, there's really no other more important issue. So we have to, be strong. And there's the old Margaret Mead line that never doubt the power of a few committed people to make change. In fact, it's the only thing that ever does. So a small group of people can make a big difference, not only on state elections or local elections, but on federal elections as well. So Christy, super excited to be here. Excited to see some new faces, see some, I don't want to say old faces, friends that I've known for a while. I think it's a great group and it's super important, right? Christy, you've been in politics, you've been in policy, you've been on the Hill, you've dealt with internationally and domestic issues. And, when I was in the state legislature down in Annapolis, Maryland, a few committed people come into the door there. it can change your perspective. I was talking to, and then I promise I'll be quiet, Congressman Malone, Congressman McGovern, who's doing a bunch of work on human rights issues down in Central America. And I said, how did his boss, Congressman Moakley, whatever it was, 30 years ago, get interested in it? And he said a couple people came in from Worcester and told him about the human rights issues going on in El Salvador. And he turned to me and said, are you interested in it? Take care of it. And it changed his life. So it was a couple of constituents literally showing up in Moakley's office in Worcester, telling him about an issue that you wouldn't think a congressman from Worcester, Massachusetts would care at all about what was going on in El Salvador. But that's what it can do. So everybody on this phone's got a story, or on this Zoom's got a story. It can make a profound difference and literally change lives, not only here in the US, but around the world. So Christy, tell us a little something. I'm throwing it over to you, right?
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. Thanks for being here. And Don,
Thank you.
Don, I just want to start by saying thank you for opening tonight and for your work across many of the groups that are represented here. But I also, have to take every occasion to thank you for your work on the SCAN board. So if you appreciate my work, thank Don, because Don was vice chair of the SCAN board when I came here. And if you take exception to my work, blame Don, because Don was vice chair of the SCAN board when I came here. So I
am not worried about that one at all.
Well, look, I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. I really enjoyed our conversation back in the summer. I was remembering the fact that when we all met the last time, we were literally right between conventions. Republican convention had happened and we'd come back, and it was before we went to Chicago for the Democratic convention as well. As many of you know, I spent a number of years as a political campaign manager, as well as working in government. So the campaign manager and me will start by reminding all of you that there are 19 days left until Election Day in this country. And we, I think, are up to about 14 states that are already doing in-person early voting. Every state has absentee balloting going on right now. So for those of you who think that there are 19 days left to campaign, no, my friends, people have already cast hundreds of thousands of votes in this country for this election. I am pleased to be here tonight to have a conversation with two people who I know and have worked with, Jonathan Cott and Lori Weigel. Jonathan is a partner these days at Capital Compliance. He comes to this work with more than 20 years of experience in communications and in policy work. I got to know Jonathan when he was a Senate staffer, and where he worked spent about 7 years with Senator Joe Manchin, and also worked with me not once but twice, because apparently he likes pain, working with Senator Chris Coons. But his work included work in the House. His work included work in the private sector. He has really seen the space from all sorts of directions. He's been involved in both the policy and governmental side, and he's been involved in the political side as well. So Jonathan, I thank you for being here. And every once in a while, I find Jonathan more often than not on Fox News appearances. So for some of you, he may be familiar from there as well. Lori, I work with Lori today at SCAN. Lori is a partner in Newbridge Strategies, which is a Republican polling firm. And Newbridge is part of a team that does polling work for SCAN in a number of settings, including some polling we did just this year related to elections. But Lori's roots in politics go back prior to her work with SCAN. She has been involved in polling efforts nationwide, 14 different campaigns in 2020, 18 in 2018, if I remember. But she's worked in a number of different places. She was a partner at Public Opinion Strategies before, and has been, as someone who's talked to the media and been cited widely as well for her work. And I was just mentioning as we were getting ready for this call that I've enjoyed some focus group work that Lori has been leading at her firm now, which has been really interesting in the context of this election. So join me in thanking both Jonathan and Lori for joining us. And what I plan to do is ask them each just a couple of questions and then really leave as much space as possible for everyone else to ask questions. So the first question I'm going to ask, I will actually pose to both of you. As both of you know, childcare is a huge issue that we focus on, and with the elections coming up, we've seen that early childhood education is really at a crossroads. And frankly, we're seeing it discussed far more in this election than we have seen in many past elections. The cost of childcare is continuing to rise. That is also driving that's a big reason why we hear more voters talking about it, and we hear therefore more candidates talking about it. Some families these days find the cost of childcare for 2 kids exceeds the cost of housing, whether that's rent or a mortgage. This year, SCAN conducted some polling that Lori was involved in that showed that voters from across the political spectrum, regardless of their party affiliation, regardless of which candidate for president they were supporting at the time, both saw the issue of the affordability crisis and the need for government action as really important. So what I want to ask both of you is, from your perspective, how do you see the issue of childcare and early education playing out differently in this current election? And what do you see as the possibility for bipartisan support for this issue to help solve this issue coming out of this election? Lori, you're nodding, so that means you win. You get to go first.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, you cited all the amazing polling numbers that we have. I mean, there's a very clear reason why childcare has been elevated to this extent. And it took place really during the pandemic. There was a point in time, and we've done work on this issue for decades now. There was a point in time where I wouldn't have seen, say, a senior Republican male telling me how childcare is a big problem in this country. And that's something we have heard in focus groups where they are volunteering this as a concern and an issue, and recognizing that there's a lack of quality, affordable childcare in a way that we never heard before. And I think the pandemic exacerbated that. And then obviously this inflation crisis that we're having has even pushed that further. So people are saying, placing the cost of childcare, while it may not personally affect them, they're saying this is a problem that extends to people I work with, people in my community, and they're really seeing this in a way that they didn't before. So I think it's crossing party lines, and it is touching people in a very different way. They're also connecting it to the economy in a way that we used to not see. Shortages of good workers, things like that. People are really noting that and saying, well, we need more people to be able to work, and a lack of quality, affordable childcare is therefore a problem for our overall economy.
Jonathan, how do you see it? What are you seeing play out in this election that might be a little bit different than what we've seen in past elections?
I think having the vice president on the ticket and her sort of background and experience with childcare, she talked about it at the convention, she's talked about it at the debate. I think when you have somebody who actually has that experience, I'm not bashing Donald Trump, but I don't think any of us think Donald Trump has struggled with the idea of the cost of childcare, the cost of education. I think the pandemic did really play a role in it, because parents started to see how important it was. Even when they were home, they needed childcare. And then they started to look at their bank account and realize, wait, if I go back to the office, that means I now have to pay all of this extra money. And you're also seeing the sandwich generation, because we're suffering so much with senior care, that you have middle-class families trying to pay for childcare and senior care at the same time, with inflation rising. So it's now an issue that's impacting a lot more people than it usually did. And I think that's why it's becoming such an important issue right now, because so many people are impacted by it. I know you're seeing a lot of people. I was out on the campaign trail yesterday in Pennsylvania, And a lot of people were mentioning the idea that their families were deciding, would one of the parents quit their job and stay at home because it was cheaper? And having to make that decision was really tough for them. That's going to be a voting issue for them a way it wasn't 10 years ago. So I do think both Democrats and Republicans are hearing from it. And it's one of those issues that isn't regional. It isn't economical. You know, it's not, oh, this is a Florida issue, or this is a rural, you know, Appalachian regional issue, or, oh, this only happens out west. This happens everywhere across the country. You know, everybody making under a certain amount of money is impacted by it. And that's why I think you're seeing people wanting to work across the aisle on it. And I think come next January, February, you're going to want to see people work in a bipartisan way, because it's a good win for them. And it's a good thing that they can go home and message to so many different constituents.
Christy, I would just add that Mark talked about stories, and I was presenting survey data to the Republican governor of Nebraska's chief of staff. And I'm going through all these numbers and telling him how it has bipartisan appeal to fund childcare and all this stuff. And he says, oh yeah, I know this is a problem. My wife and I had a baby like 9 months ago. We struggled to find childcare. He told me his whole story. And, we said, maybe you should tell your boss this story too, because this is exactly what we're hearing from thousands of his constituents. And so it really sort of drove home to me that this is, again, not a red state, not a blue state issue. It's really across the board. And, and we're seeing it in all the data, not just nationally, but at the state level. So that was a perfect story, sort of flipped on its head in terms of the candidate being the one having the story there.
Yeah, I just had a friend who had a baby in DC. They're both Senate staffers. They called the mom's family, the dad's family, and the third call was to sign up for Senate daycare. And I don't feel like that should be the third call you have to make when you find out you're having a kid. But it is right now, and they're two middle-class people who own a home in Virginia. And that's an unfortunate point that we've gotten to in this country, but that shows you how important of an issue it is.
So Jonathan, just to be clear, so what you're saying is when they found out they were expecting, they called and told their parents, and then they got themselves put on the waiting list for childcare.
Yep.
Got it. Just want to land, not at the end, at the very beginning.
Yep.
So I want to ask about one other question, and I do want to turn and give you a moment of punditry. So on the so the fun stuff is coming in a second, but first I want to talk to you a little bit about the other issue we focus on a lot, and that's child hunger. We know about the food security issue and frankly the food affordability issue that families are facing in this country. Millions of children are experiencing hunger in the U.S. And this is a critical moment for in terms of how we are able to move forward in solving that problem. I would love to get a sense of how you see, for lack of a better way of putting it, a little bit of the politics around food. Here's what I really mean. This is an issue that there have been moments in our history where it's not really been that political, or at least not partisan, but often questions about school meal incentives and feeding kids in the summer and the future of the SNAP program, which is used to be known as the food stamp program. Like that feels like there are times when that's been getting a little bit more political lately. And so I would just love to get your perspective on whether there is an opportunity for bipartisan action after this election, and whether the way that it's getting discussed in the campaigns is either helping that, or whether it's making some of this more political. And Lori, since I know you did polling on this, I'm going to turn to you first.
Great. Okay. So I think that, yes, I think there is an opportunity for bipartisan action, but we've seen this weird problem where they're just kicking the can down the road on the farm bill. That is highly unusual. We've worked on and presented data on the Hill related to the farm bill for years, like, and it was sort of regular as rain in terms of every 5 years, here we come, and we're talking about the farm bill. And, you know, suddenly that has changed. So that's unique and unusual. I'm not quite sure how that gets resolved. But I would say that, you know, for the voters, they are quite clear. I mean, they're facing rising grocery costs as well. They think government ought to be doing more, not only to address childhood hunger, but just to bring down the cost of groceries for all of us as well. It's literally number 2 to the cost of housing, which has gotten a lot more attention in terms of at least the presidential campaigns. So, and the other thing is that we have seen in that polling that when we tell people the amounts that are being provided in SNAP, I think it was a typical family of 4 gets SNAP benefits at about $6.20 per family member per day. I mean, people are aghast, and they immediately say, oh, we ought to increase it. And not just because of the amount, but because they also understand that nutritious food tends to cost more. And there's a real, I was having discussions related to farming actually last night with a bunch of Minnesotans, and you know, there was a real sense that you know, farmers markets typically, you know, they're just talking about how expensive food was, and that we need to support local food production as well. So I think that once people have a little bit of perspective, then it tends to be helpful. I think the other thing that I've learned talking to through some of the research that we've done for you, Christy, is some of the ridiculous rules and regulations. And hopefully on the Republican side, they'll be able to see, hey, some of these things don't make sense in practice, that people are struggling, they're having difficulty accessing SNAP because it's like, you know, pages and pages of, you know, bureaucratic red tape that's preventing people from being able to access this. So I feel like as a Republican, that's something that shouldn't be the case. And we shouldn't have people barred from a program because of, you know, bureaucracy and red tape.
Thanks. Jonathan.
I have seen some move towards bipartisanship on this issue. Not enough. I think we're sort of working around the edges of, you know, can we, you know, allow more nutrient dense food? Can we give exemption, you know, can we give a pass and allow them to use food stamps at farmers markets or things like that? Unfortunately, I don't see the bipartisan movement in dramatically increasing the amount of money we provide in food stamps, or the absurdity of, you know, cutting off school lunches in the summer, or, you know, denying kids a diploma because they have a school lunch debt, things like that. So I think a lot of discussions on the Hill haven't gotten to the real core of the problem. We're nibbling around the edges. And I think your polling is right. When people find out the actual facts, it changes opinions. I don't think people have the data. And if we can get them that, I think you can see some movement. But, you know, there's been Freedom Caucus bills that, you know, for I don't want to dissect the bill, but the bill basically said, you know, for those people who were in rural West Virginia using food stamps to shop at the dollar store or the Walmart, you now have to shop at Whole Foods. And if that's 100 miles away, so be it, because we want you to buy healthy food. That doesn't really take into account the reality of the situation. And I think we have to address that. And it's, you know, it's not a rural or an urban problem. It's not a black or a white problem. You know, no kid should be hungry in America. Like we have to start with that baseline agreement in Congress, and then work up from there. I'm hopeful that in a new Congress, we can start seeing movement there, but I do think, or you're right, like getting the data out there to them and explaining, this is what people are actually living off of. I know, it used to be sort of the popular thing for a member of Congress to try to live on food stamps for a week. I would encourage every member of Congress to try to live on food stamps for a month. And if they made it a week, I'd be impressed. I don't think they would. So I'd love for somebody to propose that bill. But don't know that it would get the votes. But I think there's movement, but I do think there's a lot of work that has to get done in, getting more data out there. And once we do that, you can get stuff. Cory Booker and Bill Cassidy are working well together. There's movement. So we just got to keep pushing the snowball down, and if people get in the way, snowball runs them over.
So I'm going to stay with you on this question. This is my last question, then turn it over to everybody else. But I'll start with you, Jonathan. So both of you have worked in political spaces. You both worked for campaigns. Lori, you were involved in several presidentials, as I recall. And so you've seen the political space from the inside. It also means you look at the developments that are happening in the presidential campaign, and I'll focus on that one really. You look at these and you see slightly different things than the person who's following it on, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and in the Wall Street Journal. What are the things that you're seeing? What are the things you're either watching or watching for as we go, as early voting has started and we have 19 days left?
The amount of people that went out and voted on the first day in Georgia told me that Democrats were afraid that their vote wasn't going to count. Not that they were eager to vote, that they were worried that they weren't going to be able to vote. It doubled the amount of people that voted on the first day in 2020. I don't think that's because there is that much more excitement for the vice president than there was for Vice President Biden at the time. I think that was a clear indicator that Democrats are worried about voter suppression laws that have been passed in some states, and how Donald Trump has talked about voting. I also look at candidate time. Their time is the most valuable asset they have. It's been odd to see Donald Trump go to Coachella, which I found out was in California. I was unaware that's where it was, but not a state he's going to win. He was in Colorado. He's going to Madison Square Garden. Those things are odd to me. A lot of his campaigning is odd, and he's somehow been successful on it. So maybe there's something there. He's in the Bronx today, I think. But watching the vice president in Arizona last week and seeing the level of detail she got down to, her backdrop was red. It was John McCain's campaign slogan behind her. She appealed to the LDS community, which is large in Arizona. She then went and had more events with McCain's family. And she did that because Ruben Gallego is polling 12 to 15 points ahead of Kari Lake. And Donald Trump is up, I'd say 2 to 3 points in Arizona, which means there are Ruben Gallego, Donald Trump voters. Now, to me, I'd love to meet those people, because I don't know who is a voter who walks in and says, I really like this young, progressive Latino immigrant Marine, but I also like this old, rich white guy from New York. It seems odd to me, but it shows me that Kamala Harris knows exactly where her voters are and how she has to go out and get them. And as a political person, that's a reassuring feeling to me. She's not going, she's not sitting in Philadelphia and Detroit and just hoping to turn out base vote, because I think she's realized she's going to get all of them. So to me, that's what I look for, is where they're going that's not their base, where they're going to get new voters and expand their vote. And I think she's doing it in a smart way.
Lori, I'll quickly give it to you. Are there one or two things that you're looking at as sort of tea leaves for where things are going?
Well, I'd agree with all of that, but I also think the real challenge that I see this year is just, you know, when I was working on McCain's presidential campaign, you know, you bought TV ads and that was what you did. And that was about all you had to do. And now people are telling me in focus groups, oh, I've got Netflix. I live in rural Pennsylvania. I don't watch TV at all. They're not seeing a single television ad. So, and they're like blissfully ignorant of a lot of the stuff that we pay so much close attention to. They have no idea any of that is happening, and that, you know, maybe they heard Donald Trump went to Coachella, which I would only know because I have a 21-year-old daughter, so I wouldn't know otherwise where that is. But I think it's so much harder to break through and to communicate. And so you're seeing them do some innovative things. I thought, you know, they're going on podcasts, right? They're going to, I was watching Tim Walz talk about his dog on a dog site that I follow because that's what I like to watch on TikTok. And, you know, so there's just, it's just so intriguing, but so much harder. And so the Harris campaign, who needs to be able to communicate, who needs to be able to say, I have a plan, who needs to be able to define her in a stronger way, is having a much more challenging time, I feel like, because, you know, everybody knows who Donald Trump is. They know exactly how they feel about Donald Trump. That's not really going to change all that much. The onus, unfortunately, is on her to define herself. And it's just a much more challenging time to run that kind of a campaign than it would have been even 8 years ago.
I think your point on the podcast is excellent. That is something that, you know, if they didn't exist, but if you had told John McCain, I want you to go on a podcast that a comedian runs, and on that you'll talk about his cocaine use. I don't know that you would have been on the bus much longer.
No.
They probably would have thought you were crazy, but that is what you do today because you're trying to reach a very, you know, targeted segment of the voting bloc.
So I want to pause here and give folks a chance to ask questions. We've got people, you know, Jonathan and Lori see the campaigns from a different angle than a lot of us. You know, and so I want to give folks the opportunity to ask a question.
Can I just start with can I just start with for our political gurus, and this would include you, Christy. Do you think that the shorter campaign cycle, as it turned out, that Vice President Harris has, given when President Biden announced he was not going to be seeking re-election, do you think that shorter cycle has advantaged her or disadvantaged her, or both in different ways?
I would say a huge advantage to her, and you can see it in had it been even shorter. I think had the election been 3 weeks ago, she would have won. She was on such a high from the day President Biden said he wasn't running to her consolidating Democratic votes, getting to the convention, picking Tim Walz, her speech, doing, you know, the post-convention tour. There's never been somebody who was on a trajectory like that. But at some point, it had to plateau, and it has. And now you're seeing her, you know, sort of try to stay right here. But yes, it's benefited her greatly. I think, you know, the other evidence is look at her last race, you know, the primary race in 2019. She came out with the best launch of anybody and didn't make it to Iowa. And I'd point out that, you know, a novice gay mayor of a town of 40,000 people made it further than her. I think, you know, she's a very skilled politician, but the shorter race has helped her greatly.
Lori?
Oh, go ahead. No, that's a great answer. I do think she needs to be able to say they would really benefit from the type of sort of Obama plan release, long format communication point. I don't know how many undecided voters are going to sit there and watch that type of thing, but being able to have like a plan on the economy is something that I feel like is sorely missing from that campaign right now. And I know
Corinne?
they have it. If you go
Yep.
to the website, you'll find it, but nobody knows about it. Sorry, Christy, go ahead.
No, you're good. Corinne, I saw you come in.
Well, I actually have two questions. One on policy. I feel that her ability to communicate on policy is really hurting her. People who I talk to are on the fence continue to say, I really don't know a lot about her policy. She's not revealing that, which is sad that people feel that she's not forthcoming on that, or hasn't really developed and communicated her stance and her policies on things. So that's one. I'm curious about your opinion on that. And then two, I could barely stomach 5 minutes of watching the rerun when she went on Fox. And that I have to believe that couldn't have helped her campaign at all. I'm just curious of both of your opinions on that.
Lori, well, Lori, you talked a little bit about the policy piece. Jonathan, do you want to weigh in on that piece first?
Yeah, I think she struggles in a way that a lot of Democrats struggle in. Our policies are not nuanced, but more detailed. They aren't as succinct as Republicans have been. I mean, if you go back to the old Republicans, it was family values, lower taxes, strong military, right? Like it was very easy, didn't matter who was running, that's what it was. Democrats don't have that, right? We have middle-class tax cuts and incentives for small businesses and, strengthening whatever type of family you have, and we'll be supportive of it in any way, and a military that combines our social justice values but doesn't spend too much, so like we struggle there. And I think her problem is voters don't usually in an election vote based on who has the most policy, like detailed policy positions. If they did, we'd be having a conversation about President Elizabeth Warren, because nobody had more policy plans than she did. Harris's problem is she has to introduce herself to the country, and she has to then tell them what she's going to do. But she also has to tell them what she's going to do different from Joe Biden and why she hasn't been doing it for the last 3.5 years. All of those are difficult things to do on their own. She's trying to combine them into one, which is why I think you're seeing stuff like when she says, I'm going to lower food prices, and Republicans immediately say, this is price controls, this is communism. What she's trying to do is say, here's an issue that I know people care about, high food prices. I'm going to tell you something about my background. I grew up poor and struggled to get food. I'm going to tell you something about my professional experience. I'm a prosecutor. I'm going to take on people who, have monopolies or price gouge. And she tried to like push those into one ball of issues and then, roll out. And I don't know that it's working. I think on the Fox issue, I think what she did was intentional, and I think her campaign is very happy with it. It was difficult to watch, but I think what she wanted to do was go pick a fight, show them that she could do Fox and not back down, poke and bait Donald Trump, which I think based off some of his Truth Social comments, she kind of did. And one of the reasons I go on Fox as a Democrat is there are a lot of Democrats, independents, and undecided voters who watch Fox. They just have more viewers than MSNBC and CNN, sometimes combined. So while it was difficult to watch, and I watched it a couple times, I do think they probably think she did what they wanted.
The other thing you have to think about is that people tend to vote for president based on, well, it comes down to just a few key values. And one is being a strong leader. So that kind of shows she's up for a fight, right? She's feeling strong. And then cares about people like you and me, right? Is she in line with my values? Does she care about me? And so those two things are basically what determines most presidential elections. And the policy positions just illustrate, are you a strong leader? And are you in line with my values and care about me? So that's it. And that's the only reason you talk about policy, is to exemplify all of that.
I'll chime in on the last piece on policy. So going to a story from my campaign management days. More often than not, the way we would develop our policy, like the public facing policy pages we would put on our website or things like that, was driven by a combination of key supporters who asked us about something, and very candidly, donors. We would hear from enough donors who wanted to know where our candidates stood on tax cuts. And so we had to write something, and we didn't want to just write something that you would send to a single donor. We wanted to write something that we could then direct people to. So that's when you would create a website and you'd put tax cut policy on it. And so the old saying, I think, is that you campaign in poetry, you govern in prose. And so, I remember in one campaign, we had someone who was super insistent, like earnest, well-intentioned, was like, I need 2 days with your candidate to talk about China policy. I was like, you get 14 minutes. I'm happy to have the transition scheduled 2 days, but that can't happen until they're elected. So I think that's one of those challenges, is having enough detail that the people who do pay that much attention have a place to go, but without getting so down into the minutia that you're dedicating a huge pile of your resources to writing plans for everything. So who has another question? Allison, I see your hand going up.
I'm super casual, sorry. I was off camera, but so I'm in Pennsylvania. I also have an 18-year-old son who is undecided and is driving me insane. I feel totally bombarded all the time from all angles on every type of media. My mail has like 15 pieces of political junk in it every single day. And so this is so fascinating to me, and I have so many questions, but I'm gonna sort of limit it to one question/comment. The thing I'm thinking about a lot is the information that is not coming from campaigns, but that my son in particular is getting fed through, I don't know, Russians or whoever, just people on TikTok, like that sort of information that's coming in that doesn't necessarily have any sort of basis in reality. And well, I think sort of what you're seeing on that, and then what do we do with that? How can we combat that? You should see the fact checking stuff I've been sending my son and like the media bias charts and here's how to detect things that are totally untrue. But it's really hard to fight against it.
I'm watching you two rock, paper, scissors each other.
I mean, we actually tested bots that would come up on social media. This was related to a totally different topic, but climate change, to help combat misinformation. A lot of it, people, except for the Russians, a lot of people are sharing things and think it's true. And, they kind of feel bad when they find out it's not true. But we also have a group of people that are they are so entrenched in a certain worldview that they are not, the fact checking doesn't work. And there have been psychologists that have tested, if you provide people with a counterpoint to the misinformation, that they just dig in more. They don't immediately change their mind. So it is very difficult. If I had the cure for this, I'd be a zillionaire and I wouldn't be on this call tonight. But you know, I'd be on a yacht somewhere, I guess. But there's you know, this is a huge problem. I think it's only going to get worse. We're already seeing AI, you know, and voices that sound like people and all kinds of terrible things. So I have a 17-year-old, so at least he's not voting yet, but we're gonna have a conversation later, I guess, about misinformation online right away. I'm so sorry that that's happening.
Cynthia, I
But
saw
I hope
your
you
hand
have a
come.
cure.
Sorry, Cynthia, I saw you raise your hand real quick. I know we're close to time, so I'm gonna go
This
ahead.
is a quick question. I'd love to ask each of you for your candidate, if you could give them one piece of advice of something they should do in the last 3 weeks of this campaign, what would it be?
Sorry, Jonathan?
Stop doing rallies and start doing small town halls. If somebody waits online in Michigan in October for a rally, they're already voting for you.
Lori?
Yeah, I would have an army of door to door because like Allison said, she's already got the 15 pieces of mail every day. I think it's that human connection is going to be one of the few things. I had a friend call me and say, what can I do? How can I help? And I was like, you have to go there. You have to go knock on doors because I really don't think the postcards and all that stuff, it's just going to get lost in the sea of other information. It's got to be that human touch.
Christy, I saw Anya's hand was up, so I want to give her a chance too.
Absolutely.
I was just wondering if either one of you have a strong feeling of women voting in this election, because from what I'm seeing and reading in a lot of polling, there seems to be sort of a stealth division that's starting to form between the male vote and the female vote.
I think the only exception I would take to that is I don't think it's stealth.
I don't either.
I
will
but
say
it's something we've never seen before, so.
I will say as a Democrat, the more women that vote, the better. If only women voted, there would only be Democrats. They vote pretty overwhelmingly. And I think this way, this election will be even greater. I think women make up 52 to 54% of the electorate, and they vote Democratic in probably like a 58 to 60% in some elections, something like that. So I think you'll probably see a greater margin this time, but you're also seeing a greater margin of the male vote. So I think Trump is trying to bring out more white men who haven't voted in the past. And I think Harris is trying to bring out more women who haven't voted in the past. And I think whoever does a better job of that probably will win.
Lori, any other thing to add to that?
No, but I mean, I did polling I wrote articles on the gender gap in 1996. So, I mean, it's been there, but it has been exacerbated, and it is biggest with the youngest people. So that gender gap is massive among those, you know, under 35-year-old voters, especially under 30s. I don't know how those young people are ever going to get married because they do not see eye to eye on very much.
The funny thing about that, Lori, is there was a piece out either today or yesterday that literally was about how people who are dating view other people based on their voting.
Oh.
And about whether people will swipe left or swipe right based on the political views of people that they are interested in. So, so that goes back to your statement about, I don't know how many of those guys are coupling up. So
I tell you, my 23-year-old daughter would never date a Republican.
Yeah.
She is hardcore.
And Anya, I've heard that too, that when you say stealth, that it's sort of like there's more split households potentially than in the past, and women who are potentially not, who may not be voting for the same individual that their husband is voting for, whether or not they say that. I have heard that, so
yep.
Who knows?
Well, Mary, I'm conscious of time. And so, Mark, I want to turn the floor back over to you. I want to thank both Lori and Jonathan for being with us tonight, and thank everybody for the questions. If you have other questions, I will note, please don't hesitate. I do want to, sorry, one more thing, Mark, before I do turn it over. And that is, I want to introduce everybody to Allison Dembeck, who joined us tonight. Allison is with us. She is our new head of policy. She heads our federal government relations team. She joined us. Allison, are we at week 6 now? I think it might be
Not quite.
week
This is the end of week 5.
There we go.
Don't rush it. Don't rush it, Christy. I'm still going to play the new card as long as I can.
But Allison joined us from, she spent 12 years at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and literally has worked through leadership offices, committee offices, and personal offices in both the Senate and House. So I think she's got Capitol Hill covered for us. But please feel free to reach out to either of us if you have other questions. Thank you so much. Mark, I turn it to you.
Christy, yeah, I know it's 7 o'clock. I just think what I heard is it's really fascinating, and it's upside down from we talked about Coachella to flirting and to voting patterns. It just reemphasizes, right, to, and talking about door knocking and making phone calls, how important every vote is. And it is true not only on the federal level, right, but it's also true on the local level as well. So the work that SAVE has shown is effective, is not going to become systemic, not only here in the United States, but across the world if we don't get people off the sidelines and into the arena. So thank you all so much for joining us. I hope you'll get engaged. I hope you'll stay engaged. Dawn, I don't know if you're going to have the last word, but the people that have been involved for 10 years, again, thank you so much. There's so much more work to do, and that's what makes it fun. I mean, democracy is a contact sport, and you gotta get at it. And it's fun if we make changes because it impacts people's lives. Dawn, do you want to say goodbye?
I just want to say, I think this is one of the best conversations we've ever had. And I'm glad you recorded it so we can share it with, I'm talking about, you're part of it. Yes, definitely.
Thank you.
But thanks, John. That was one of the best conversations I think we've ever had as a group. So I'm glad we recorded it. We can share it more broadly. And a deep thanks to Jonathan and to Lori specifically, and Christy for pulling this together, Mark for being here, everybody for participating. I think this was terrific. Just terrific.
Great.